Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, Rich.
Welcome to the Shoot Room.
Thank you.
Can you tell people out there who you are and what you do?
I am Michelle Walker. I'm Technical Director with the Rivers Trust, which is the umbrella body of the Rivers Trust movement.
Perfect. Can you take us from where you grew up from school through your sort of career content page to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Bristol and Somerset, so that's my kind of home, not too far from here. And from a young age, just have always loved nature and particularly rivers. I can remember very early days playing rivers, building dams, just being my happy place really. And having a primary school teacher, Mrs. Wathen, who was just really introducing us all to nature and exploring wildlife and hunting for bugs. So, you know, from that kind of age really was just always interested in the environment and nature, and through kind of secondary school and then university.
So often we hear about an influential teacher that made a point in someone's career that sort of really ignited that passion to them. So that's awesome to hear that. So where was uni? What did you do there?
So I went to Manchester Poly and I did environmental management, so very vocational. Went and did work placement in Ireland, looking at developing a catchment management plan actually for an area of blanket bog that was causing flash flooding in a show cave where visitors would go, and trying to reduce the flood risk there. So that was in the kind of late 80s and early 90s. Wow. So a long time ago.
And was that practical connection something that was always important to you?
Very much, yeah. I find it very hard to think in abstract. I like to see things on the ground, and I like to see sort of case studies and understand how things work. And that whole study, we were looking at where the drainage went underground. We did a lot of caving and just seeing, physically how a river catchment works and understanding where you can intervene and improve things was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. And Ireland was a fantastic place to live and study. And then from there, through that course, I got really interested in GIS, Geographical Information Systems. I've always loved maps and, cartography, and just, that interest blossomed, and I went then to do a master's at Edinburgh University in GIS, and just, learn how to create maps and digitize. And, it was back again in the sort of mid-90s. Things were just kind of tipping into the digital era really, but we were still hand digitizing maps from aerial photos, so I can understand the whole process of how surveys and maps were done kind of before everything's been. Can
you give people a flavour of how GIS systems from what they might see today have changed since when you first started using them?
Oh, massively. I mean, back when I was doing my masters, we didn't really have any kind of web access, and that was the first time I ever got an email address. I can remember someone explaining what the World Wide Web was. It's mind-blowing to think that was in my lifetime now, because things have changed so much. And we were creating maps from aerial photos where you have overlapping aerial photos and you're looking in stereo, and we were digitizing them, but it was all manually done, whereas now an algorithm will kind of compute it all for you. And all of the systems we used back then were command lines, so you had to type a whole list of commands to print a map out, not press a button like you do now. So yeah, things have changed a lot, and I get referred to as the dinosaur in our team now, because you tell someone who's just graduated about this and they're like, no, that's not possible.
Even so I did my PhD sort of early 2000s to mid, and even then we were still having to save things on floppy disks.
Yes, it
was still,
exactly.
and pretty much once an hour it would crash, and systems wouldn't work and you'd lose everything. Compared to where we are now is ridiculous.
I remember printing my dissertation out on a dot matrix printer, with the sort of folding paper on the desk. Two of us in the house printing it. It was just, I could still hear it. So that was sort of education.
And Masters was Edinburgh?
It was in Edinburgh, and from there I went...
Because of the course or because of the place?
Because of the course, yeah. There were very few GIS courses around back then. It was one of the first, and just had a really good reputation, and it was what I wanted to do. And I'd met a couple of people who'd been through that course as well, and I thought, I can then apply some technical skills to the environmental interests that I have. So.
And did GIS jobs exist then? Were
they did, yeah. So I went straight from that to my first sort of, postgrad job, which was British Antarctic Survey. And so I went to the Mapping and Geographic Information Centre, MAGIC, which was a brilliant acronym. And we were mapping areas of the Antarctic that, you might have a map of the whole Antarctic Peninsula that's maybe the scale of a road map. But if you're a geology surveyor or a scientist going out into the field on a particular mountain range, you need much more detailed information. So we would create the base maps from aerial photos, and then the geologists and the field scientists could go out and plan their field work and then go and map their results accordingly.
Wow.
So that was amazing.
And did you manage to travel with that?
Yes, went down for 2 seasons down south, and it was just phenomenal. It really was.
I love the language there, down south.
Yes, that was the lingo everyone used. It's kind of hard to get out of that lingo, really. But yeah, brilliant, amazing experience.
I think it shows the sort of underplaying nature of environmental scientists. Oh, we just went south a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, all the way down. All the way down. And then after that, next role?
So from there, I went back to Ireland. Always kind of loved Ireland. A lot of people think I must have come from there, but no, it's just kind of something that always touched my heart. So ended up doing various roles in consultancy, so in Dublin and then Galway, and spent 4 really brilliant years in Galway, diversifying skills really, so working with local authorities, with academia, with geoscience consultancies, picking up lots of different GIS and remote sensing skills.
Can you help people understand what remote sensing is?
Yeah, remote sensing would be using satellite imagery, so things like Landsat, and now we've got Sentinel, and satellites that are collecting data about the planet, and you can tell so much from that information. So you can see, things that you can't see with the naked eye. You can sense in different wavelengths and use that to create maps and to model the environment.
Cool. So after consultancy?
So from there, I moved back home. So met my now husband, actually. And
did you meet in Ireland or back across here?
He actually grew up in the same village as me, but we only met while I was visiting home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we went to different schools, so it was quite funny. But yeah, eventually, after sort of trying to do a long distance thing, I decided it was time to move back to where I grew up, and so settled back there. And from there was working in consultancy around the Bristol area, but mostly working with the Environment Agency on catchment management GIS, and got really interested in that. And, never felt like consultancy in the private sector was my kind of spiritual home anyway, but we went through a round of redundancies. So, I lost my job and was like, what am I going to do now? I felt like I had quite a niche skill set and, what are the chances I'm going to find something? But just happened to be talking to Arlene Rickard and Dylan Bright from the Rivers Trust, and they were like, well, we've just kicked off a project and we need someone with your skills. And, it was just one of those really fortunate kind of conversations that led...
And if you hadn't had the change in the sort of previous job, you probably wouldn't have been looking around the conversation. Exactly,
yeah. To sort of jump from a job with, all of the perks that you get in the private sector to something in a charity that feels quite risky, but, it was the best move I've ever made.
How would you describe the difference in the cultures of working sort of in a private sector organisation to a charitable body?
Very different. I mean, private sector, you're very much driven by, all of the sort of finances and the money and making profit and margin. And it's not what drives me. I'm driven by wanting to make a difference. And the thing that makes the biggest difference for me is the stuff I've been doing in the 13 years I've been with the Rivers Trust. I'm building on it all the time. We're not flitting from one project to another just because it'll make us more money. We are about the difference we're making, not about the profit we're trying to generate. And that is it's that purpose that I need from my career. And it's, the variety that I've had as well, and the creativity and the brilliant people that I've met. It's been, just a fantastic place to work.
Lovely to hear. So over that 13 years, all in the same type of role?
Yeah, so I started as a data and evidence manager. I was head of data and evidence, only me. We gave ourselves those titles because we were engaging with the Environment Agency, with big business. There was only 6 of us when I joined. We're now over 75 people, and I'm now technical director jointly. There's 2 of us running a team of 15, data and evidence and modelling and GIS people. So, it's grown a lot, but all starting from that kind of little, that one conversation.
There must be an awesome sense of sort of genuine ownership, because that's a department you've built out. And just as we have with a business starting afresh, it's your own little startup within the Rivers Trust.
Yeah, and it is really satisfying to see how things have grown, and taking on people whose skill sets technically, far exceed what I could do, and just seeing where they can take those little ideas. That's been really satisfying.
Have you had, I remember a big chunk of my PhD was remote data acquisition and GIS.
Okay.
And I remember when we first hired someone in a previous role, they came in and I asked the question and they went, oh, no, I just do it this completely different way. And I suddenly went, oh God.
Yeah.
It's totally like the next chapter's turned on that. Have you had one of those recently where someone's a technical thing that you would have been like, whoa?
I mean, one of the frustrations I find from kind of, becoming more of a manager and a director is that you're not hands-on anymore. And
do you miss that?
Really miss it. Yeah, I do. It was that kind of excitement of becoming really proficient and skilled at something and learning new skills all the time is really satisfying to me. So I do miss it. And, I have this real thing. I mean, I've used the Esri kind of software suite my whole career, from the mid-90s. And it moves on every 6 months. If you're not using it, you don't know where all the buttons are. You don't know where the functions are. And I open up ArcGIS now, and I'm like, I don't know how to use it anymore.
I don't even know how to open it now.
Yeah.
So Lara, our amazing GIS and data lead, sat in the room, and I don't miss it, the technical stuff and the spreadsheets and the models and things. But I do love the moments where I get a window back into the data, or can keep up as Lara and Ellie and others are describing what's happening and ask for something different. But when something appears as, I could just do that. So Lara's done this amazing visualization of how every journey we've ever taken as a business evolves over time. And you can see from 2 of us starting to when people arrive and when people were recruited in London, and suddenly the train journeys zoom up and everything changes. And I didn't even know that was possible. And Lara turned up with this and I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. So
I need to see that, Lara.
I love it when that happens. So final one on the sort of career. What does a day choose a time frame, a day or a week, what does that look like for you at the moment?
So
when you're not visiting us at Montgomery?
It can really vary. I mean, just in this week we've published our sewage map, the update with all of the data that shows where untreated sewage is spilling into rivers. So I'm kind of managing some of that process and overseeing it and making sure that we're quality assuring the data that goes out and the sort of comms around that. Also managing things like our whole sort of software framework. That's something I've been doing this week. But a big part of my role at the moment is focused on monitoring, and particularly on citizen science. We've got a huge project that we're involved with called CastGo, the Catchment Systems Thinking Cooperative. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Not as sharp as magic.
No, it's not. It's not as good. We can do better. But that is trying to build a national framework for citizen science, so that the data that Rivers Trust and local communities collect can be integrated into decision making by government, by the water industry, and trying to get data quality of a standard that can be integrated with other data sets as well. And there's so many benefits to that, and it's hugely challenging. I mean, there's 30 partners involved, and that's only scraping the surface. So a lot of my role at the moment will be talking and communicating about what we're trying to do, and trying to get people on board with the vision. And that's a different kind of skill set that I started my career with.
Partnership and collaboration is so important, but it's really hard.
Yes.
And takes patience and time and compromise. And so often people talk about partnerships, but they mean I want other people to do what I say.
Yeah.
And that isn't the same thing, right? You have to find that common ground for everyone, and that's what takes, especially with 30 partners. I mean,
Right from the beginning of, so the catchment-based approach, which is a sort of DEFRA initiative that Rivers Trusts are heavily involved with, has been going for 10 years now, and that is all about trying to build local partnerships at a catchment scale to, change the way we farm, the way we govern, the way we do business, and the impact that we have on catchments. And that is all about partnership building. And back at the beginning of that sort of CABA process, I can remember one of our partners, Alex Inman, who's all about engagement, talking about, there's two ways to do things. You can either, even if you know what the solution is, if you try and impose your vision on other people, you'll get going quicker, but you'll spend decades potentially trying to get them to feel ownership of it. If you take longer at the beginning, and it'll be frustrating because you're not doing anything, you're just building that partnership, but you will get people on board and you can go a lot further and faster in the long run. And that's a lesson I've really sort of taken on board. And we're definitely there at the moment with this kind of national citizen science framework. It feels quite slow and turgid. We've been going for 18 months and it's been a lot of building the partnership and collaboration, and now we're starting to get into our stride and actually deliver things.
Nice. So let's go from the day job to sort of data in general.
Yeah.
How would you describe the state of environmental data in the UK? What's available today?
So the good and the bad. The good, I think, one of the things, because we work across England, Wales, a bit in Scotland, but Ireland, north and south as well. England, by far, across all of those kind of nations, is leading the way when it comes to open data, I think. Back in, I think, 2015, DEFRA led the charge with sort of open DEFRA, and we saw thousands of data sets being published openly. And by openly, we don't just mean chuck the data out there. You have standards that are set by the European Commission, actually. And so, really making the data accessible, discoverable, but easy to use. And that's been fantastic. That's made a huge difference to us. Being able to use the software that's provided by ESRI for charities, but also having access to the data, that's been the sort of foundation of everything we've done. But, the bad is that we still have a real dearth of environmental data, particularly monitoring, what's the current state and how the interventions we're doing are improving or, maybe not improving. The statutory monitoring is really sparse. Our State of the Rivers report that we published recently had a real deep dive into the kind of monitoring situation. You could just see a decline over particularly the last 10, 15 years. And there are just gaps everywhere. And this data is underpinning billions of pounds worth of investment decisions, but we don't really know what the issues are, what the causes are. There's so much uncertainty about the problem. So, that would be the biggest challenge we have at the moment, is trying to fill that gap, which is where the kind of community, citizen science and voluntary sector comes in as well.
Have you started to see AI and sort of machine learning impact what data is available yet?
Yeah, definitely. And, we've just taken on our first member of staff who's a machine learning specialist, actually.
Really?
Yeah, so we worked with the Alan Turing Institute and had an intern Grant basically come, and he worked on analysing monitoring data from water quality sondes, so a bit of kit that you place in the river that's continually collecting data on the water chemistry.
We have those due to go in either at or will be in every site and go across the board.
Brilliant, yeah. So, one of the challenges is trying to interpret that data. It's, if you've got lots of different parameters, what do they mean? And when one goes up and one goes down, what's it telling you? So, he started to kind of look at how you can use machine learning, and I don't even pretend to understand it. I mean, I always have to ask him to explain it to me like I'm an 8-year-old, because his brain seems to work on a different plane to mine. But it's fascinating, there's so much potential there, throwing huge amounts of big data and, seeing what meaning you can derive from it. And I think that's really exciting.
Without that, you're almost, if everything goes as well as can be hoped with the citizen science work, you're creating a big problem for yourselves to solve.
Exactly, yeah, definitely. And not just, spot samples that citizen science could collect everywhere, but we want low-cost monitoring sondes in every catchment, and yeah, you're going to have a huge big data problem there.
Fascinating stuff. So any other challenges in terms of the data?
So definitely still challenges around some data sets being unavailable, unaffordable to charities. So, a big one for us is the sort of national soils inventory, which is, owned by a university and is only available commercially. You can't get it on any kind of
even
deal.
For charities.
Yeah, so, and for a charity like us that is working nationally, we can't buy the data set.
Which university?
Cranfield University.
Cranfield, if you're listening to this, come on, help the Rivers Trust out and make that available so we can all work together on it.
It's a key data set because it tells us about the hydrology of the soil, and soil is so key to solving so many of our climate and biodiversity and river catchment problems.
And in a world whereby, it hasn't stopped raining for 4 months this year, farmers are facing an incredibly tough time of things. The ability to better understand the interaction between water, the soil and rivers surely helps everyone.
Exactly. And, it can't be an insurmountable problem. I understand that, some of these data sets generate income to keep organisations going. But that's where I think government comes in. If we can't use the data and share it with all those partners, that's the key thing. You can buy a license for it, but then I can't share it with the partners that I need to engage. And if we can't collaborate, we can't solve these problems. So, that would be something government could do, is just open up the licensing on things like the detailed water network data that Ordnance Survey own. Again, that's unaffordable to us. And we can use that to plan across a river network, which dams and weirs do you tackle first, because you can trace upstream.
It's so interesting. So there's lots of challenges about. So we're hopeful to develop 2 wind farms at the 2 big sites we've got in Scotland. We've got a sister organisation, Low Carbon, who are a renewable developer, amazing group, and we're trying to make it the most sustainable, environmentally appropriate way of doing this possible. So we've sequenced our tree planting across the site to allow areas to be explored and things like that. So it sits together wonderfully. And there's a local levy that goes from a successful wind farm to a local community because of it being there. And people quite rightly say, well, okay, you're doing this in the environment, we want our part of that. I don't think people realise that the data about their environments isn't available and isn't free, it is held privately. So that's really interesting. Yeah,
and we're seeing a lot of that at the moment with particularly biodiversity net gain. I was chatting to Laura about that over our walk earlier. And a lot of the data that's being collected on that is being retained by developers and not shared openly. And that's a real missed opportunity, I think.
Of course, if it had been in the legislation to say anything that's collected to support this must be.
Yeah. And it's, it's hard to sort of think ahead like that, but we've seen it over and over again with projects. I can remember a project called Wetland Vision that ran about 10 years ago, and it was fantastic. It was collecting lots of data sets and looking at where historical wetlands have been and where the potential was to restore them. Fantastically useful data sets for targeting our work, and the data wasn't openly available. It was just so frustrating. You could see a little PDF map, but us data geeks want to put it on a system and overlay it with our own data and combine it with other data to derive meaning.
So we've got a local MP coming in tomorrow, a couple of members of the House of Lords coming in, and some Labour candidates in the next few weeks. I'm going to ask the question about if you're successful in the next election, will you help contribute to making more environmental data available to people?
Excellent. That would be brilliant. And, fund the initiatives like Casco, which is enabling local communities to fill that gap. There's so many people willing to be
and the added benefit of that is you make someone, you help someone become an owner of the environment.
Absolutely.
And that's why almost, and we talked about fishermen and kayaking, I think earlier, I don't mind why someone loves or interacts with the environment. If they do, they'll become a custodian of it.
Absolutely.
And I'm not a fisherman, sorry Dan, but fishermen take litter from a riverbank. They don't bring it there, real ones. Can we talk about open water swimming?
Oh, yes, please.
So you're passionate about that?
Absolutely, yeah.
When, how, what? Take us through.
So, from a young age, as I said earlier, kind of always been splashing about in rivers and just, love immersing myself quite literally in nature. And probably from sort of teens and university onwards would always jump in a bit of water if there was an opportunity. I've always been into climbing, mountaineering, anything outdoors really. So always did a bit of it, but probably kind of in the last 10 years have really started to kind of take it seriously as a sport, because, you know, I mean, I've hit menopause now, and that's a big transition in your life, and swimming, and particularly outdoor swimming, is so good for your mental health and well-being. I can remember, I mean, I swim regularly at Clevedon, which is on the kind of the Severn Estuary, and going to the sea there, I mean, it's always muddy. It doesn't look very appealing. Nobody kind of wants to dive into lovely blue water. But just seeing 80-year-old women coming out of the sea and going, this is a sport I can grow old with, and, you know, the whole social life around it, and just the fact that you're swimming outdoors and no two swims are ever the same. There's always some difference in the water, in the climate, and in the sort of, you know, conditions that you're swimming in is just fantastic.
And are you 12 months of the year?
Oh yeah, I'm a winter swimmer. Yeah, we came back from the Lake District a few weeks ago. We had 70 of us all swimming up in Derwent water, and
wow.
I think it was 2 or 3 degrees.
And how long would you be in for at that temperature?
Only a few minutes at that temperature. Yeah. I mean, I have friends who are kind of ice milers. They're pretty hardcore, so there's always someone who can.
Ice milers, people who swam a mile in ice water.
Yeah, so it has to be under 5 degrees to get an ice mile, and I think there's an even lower temperature for an extreme ice mile. So
Josh behind the camera, both Josh and Laura are shaking their heads dramatically behind the camera.
I mean, I love cold water. It's really good for mental health, I find. You know, if I'm stressed, I just get this urge to get into cold water, because you can't think about anything else. If you're stressing about work or family or whatever, you get in cold water and all you can think about is how cold it is. And it, you know, you get this huge buzz and endorphin release, and it's, you know, there's so much evidence around how it's really good to condition your body to deal with stress, as well as, you know, so many other physical and mental health benefits.
So if someone thinks, I really want to get involved in that, how do you safely get involved in it?
Sure. I mean, you know, firstly, do not go alone, okay, particularly cold water swimming. There's so many swimming groups around the country. I mean, go onto the Outdoor Swimming Society website or Facebook page, and you'll find, you know, a network of groups around you. There are swimming coaches who specialise in introducing people safely to outdoor swimming. Go to an organised event. I mean, Outdoor Swimmer magazine, look in the back of that, there's, you know, hundreds if not thousands of organised events now. Just get involved that way, and learn from other people who know how to do it safely.
And from when you started jumping in rivers as a kid to now, how have you seen water quality in the state of our rivers change?
So, I mean, back when you're a kid, you probably aren't thinking too much about that. But when I think about the river I used to be sort of splashing around in back home, I don't remember it being thick with mud every time it was in flood. And that's one real difference I notice now. Whenever my local river, it's the Congsbury Yeo, and it's not a very big river catchment. You know, I've walked most of it, and every time it rains, it just runs. You know, our soil around us is quite iron rich, so it's very red, and it's like this reddy brown colour, and we've got so used to that, I think, now.
And where does that soil come from?
All from farmers' fields. You know, we've lost a third of our topsoil since the war in this country on average, and we've only got an average of 60 years left at this rate.
We wrote a piece last year about the reality of land use. So we often go, well, there's not enough room for conservation, we need all the land for farming. When you start really looking at that, and facts like we've lost a third of the topsoil already, facts like 30% of the food from, this is a DEFRA study in the early 2020s, was 30% of food never left the farm because there was no one to pick it, or it didn't meet the aesthetic requirements. And was just wasted. And then once food hit the home, there was 30% wasted in the home as well. And you start going, well, hold on a second, let's keep the soil in the fields, and let's actually pick what we produce, and let's not waste stuff. And all of a sudden, there's a lot more land than we think there is.
Absolutely. And, you know, that soil isn't just producing food, it's trapping carbon, you know, helping fight climate change, it's reducing flood risk, it's reducing drought impacts, you know, it's underpinning so much of what we need.
No wonder industry would let its core product, a third of it, leave. Just it's so difficult. Why do you think we are losing so much? What do you think is the barrier to either farmers' practices or being more aware of that?
So, you know, a lot of it is the drive for cheaper food. You know, at the end of the day, farms are business, and we all know the pressure they're under to try and, you know, it's the biggest mental health crisis in the country is, you know, farmers trying to kind of make ends meet. We've got to be prepared to pay more for our food, but, you know, reducing the waste and getting better quality food is part of that as well.
I did a conference once and said none of us are paying the price we should be for food. It's too. Yeah. And then the challenge back was, well, hold on, we've got a cost of living crisis. Absolutely, we do. It doesn't stop the truth that food is underpriced for farmers and for the environment.
But a key thing is, you know, farmers aren't just producing food, they are stewards of the land, and that land provides other services. And that's one of the key things that the Rivers Trust movement and the catchment-based approach is all about. It's, can we bring in those funding streams that can pay for all of the services that land produces? So, you know, when we talk about flood risk, it's bringing in funding from the insurance industry, because if you can reduce your flood risk upstream, you reduce the risk downstream. And, you know, it'll be the kind of local authority or the environment agency that can fund measures upstream that are much more cost effective. If you work with nature and put in, you know, leaky dams and natural flood management measures upstream, lots of them, small interventions, is much more cost effective than building big concrete interventions downstream.
So our friend Rob Gardner, who's the founder of Rebalance Earth, is trying to help. He was on the podcast, we just released it a week or so ago, trying to do exactly that and help route the insurance companies and the beneficiaries from sort of the supermarket perspective into those additional ecosystem services. I think the real shame is, I think the government missed the opportunity on, when Michael Gove was Environment Secretary, I was still working at the Environment Agency, and he was very much talking about, you know, public money for public good and recognising all those services. Rather than actually seeing those develop, I think we've done what often happens with the civil service. We've gone, oh God, no, don't change anything, just slightly label it differently a bit. So we've gone with sustainable farming initiatives and things, which aren't really changing anything. And as a result, we're not still recognising the value that a double width of a buffer strip could bring to, so buffer strip, extra land on the outside of a field that's not farmed for environmental space and would keep a lot more soil in fields and things like that. I think that resistance to change has almost hurt farmers in not allowing them to receive what they should for that stewardship side of it.
We need to throw the rule book out, really. You know, we've got this kind of nexus of problems at the moment: climate change, biodiversity, you know, water. We've got to be prepared to rip the rule book up and do things differently. And it's not like
it's not going to fix it.
It's not that we don't know what to do. You know, there's plenty of brilliant ideas out there, but we need some leadership from government and business. And I think business are leading the way more than government. You know, they're, particularly when you talk about big supply chains and you know, the food industry, they can see this causing them a problem if they don't have soil or water. So those are the partners we're working with, as well as people like the insurance industry, green finance. You know, we're having to work with those corporate partners, and that brings its own challenges, because a lot of these businesses are also polluting and causing the problem, and that's a big challenge for our movement and NGOs who are trying to work in partnership. You know, you can be accused of greenwashing and taking dirty money, and it's a really fine line to tread between trying to bring the funding in that can make the difference. You know, we need billions to fix this problem. Just a few sort of government grants aren't going to do it. We've got to work with business and direct that money in a better way.
We hear that challenge often about people don't like the idea of recognising the value of natural capital. My argument is the reverse hasn't helped. Not recognising it has made it totally free for people to pollute. It's meant the very limited space in the atmosphere we have for carbon, people can take as much space as they like because there's no price on it or consequence. If the price of releasing a tonne of carbon was £1,000 a tonne tomorrow, people's practices would change dramatically and immediately. I'm just reading a book called Pricing the Priceless by Paula DiPerno. Amazing environmental economist, and I would recommend that to anyone. It is just an incredible book and shows how actually the failure to price for carbon is the cause of climate change. Because fossil fuels not sat there going, please dig me up and burn me. but there is no consequence for doing so.
Absolutely. It's that externality that we see over and over again. If you're not paying, we don't have the polluter pays principle.
No.
In reality, it's pollution pays, because you can cut corners, you can make more profit. And I mean, I can understand the argument that, reducing nature to a pound symbol is not recognising the real value of it. But that's the reality. We live in a really overpopulated country, and everything, is impacted by economic activity. So we've got to get nature recognised on those terms. And I think
whether its value being zero, no one thinks it's zero.
Exactly.
So whether you put a pound sign it or not, you've got to sort of articulate it that way. So coming all the way back round, how important is the data and information we have, do you think, to your ability to advocate and campaign for our rivers and the environment?
Well, it won't surprise you to know I would say it's essential. We describe ourselves as an evidence-led organisation. If you've got the data and evidence behind you, you can convince stakeholders, bring them on board, you can discover the issue together. It's what I was saying earlier about not imposing your view on other people. If you can, we've seen it over and over again, the workshops we have, if you gather people around a map, they start to explore together rather than, me trying to kind of sell my idea. You get down and you look at what does the data and evidence tell us about what's going on here. And, not just a paper map, but we've got models and decision support tools that let people play with scenarios and discover for themselves what are the issues, what are the solutions, where do I put them? And a key part of it is measuring the change. Have our interventions made a difference? Can we learn from that and improve what we do in the future? And that comes down to the sort of monitoring that we do as well. So that's a really key thread. But another thing that we've seen, particularly over recent years with things like the sewage map, is the power of data and evidence to really drive public engagement and advocacy and campaigning, which can in turn change policy and change where government and business are going. And particularly the sewage, campaign that's happened, and that's been brilliant because it's been collaborative, lots of organisations all pushing in the same direction. And that all stemmed from getting better data. People didn't know anything about CSOs, combined sewer overflows, even sort of 5 years ago.
Explain to people how they work.
So a combined sewer overflow, historically in this country, we built our sewer system so that rainwater from roofs, buildings, roads gets piped into the same network as, sewage from your bathroom. And so when it rains heavily, that system gets overwhelmed. The pipes can't cope with the amount of flow. And so CSOs are pressure release points in the network where you can discharge that rainwater and mixed with untreated sewage straight into rivers, lakes, sea, the environment. And theoretically, when they were built, long time ago, that sewage should have been diluted to the point where it maybe wouldn't have such a big environmental impact. But as we've seen from the data that's come out, and it's only since the data's been published, we can see that that system and that theory is being abused so much. I mean, millions of hours and, hundreds of thousands of spills a year. And spilling when it hasn't been raining, spilling when, the sewage works isn't at full capacity. It's showing there's been underinvestment in that network. So we've got a fundamental problem the way it's designed, but we can do a lot about that. We can reduce the amount of rainfall that's getting into the system, so sustainable urban drainage, put a rain butt in your own garden and trap the rainfall before it gets into the drains, putting in
more trees upstream, more scraping fields, keeping
natural
more
flood management, slow the flow, slow clean water rather than fast dirty water. It solves so many problems.
It's really interesting, isn't it? So we're recording this in April 24, and I think subject to when we get a general election, it feels like certainly in the time I've been working in the environment sector, so the last 15 years, it feels like a tipping point of public perception about the water companies. And you're even starting to get you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg the other day coming and saying, let a water company go bust if they've taken too much out, because even he's saying, well, you know, you want to play the economic game? You've done that. You've overstretched yourself now. There's got to be a consequence of that. Do you think we're going to see changes in the water industry?
I mean, it's hard to see where we can go with so much debt sitting there, you know. I mean, we would love to not be in this position, but is nationalising them the answer? Because who's going to pay that debt? You know, is it going to sit on the private sector? So I don't think that, or in the public sector, sorry. Is there a simple answer? I don't think so, but certainly, you know, keeping that momentum and that public pressure and making sure that we don't get ourselves deeper into this problem. It's going to take, it's been 30 years in the making. I'm afraid it's not going to be an overnight fix. And, you know, even the investment that we're seeing in this next, you know, the sort of water industry investment cycles going 5-year cycles. And it's still a lot of the investment that's going in to kind of, you know, fix the sewage crisis is going into the wrong things, really. It's going into those hard engineering concrete storage tanks rather than
because they're easier to measure and cost, and people, old school engineers, know.
Yeah, they want the certainty, and that is that's another of those things we've got to rip the rule book up and think differently. And you know, we're trying to develop large scale kind of nature-based solutions projects now, which, you know, we're looking to tackle that systemic resistance to change, but it takes millions, and it's going to take a long time to sort of turn that tanker around. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't start trying, and we've got to accept that the time frame is long and manage expectations about how quickly things can be fixed. And we see that a lot. You know, we've had lots of communities getting enraged about what's going on in their local patch and angry with the water companies and wanting it to be better now. And I've taken my water quality measurement, right, water company, why isn't it fixed already? And, you know, I just think there's a real challenge there, that we've got all these people excited about it, but maybe in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, have we made enough of a difference quickly enough? That's where that bringing finance from lots of places together, you know, finding out where the ecosystem services beneficiaries are, bringing their funding to bear on it and trying to ramp up the timeframes. But that requires lots of different funders and businesses and government partners to collaborate and work together. And that's challenging.
It all comes back to the education piece as well, sometimes. And one of the dangers of being very engaged with sort of the natural capital economy, the environment sector, be it rivers or land management or whichever aspect you're working in, you can often think everyone knows what you know. Yeah. And, you know, even your social media and your information, you know, you create your own echo chamber, so everyone you talk to knows about the challenges. But when you look across the broader society, the sort of people who will be voting at the next election, how many of them would be willing to sit down and understand that the investment required is decades and billions and time? And it's so hard. And I, as you were talking, I was thinking, maybe this comes when this generation who's doing their geography GCSEs now learns about this, and when they're sat in our chairs, maybe that's when we get that level of awareness, perhaps. Yeah,
and I think, you know, what we were talking about earlier about engaging local communities and the public in collecting data, citizen science is part of that education piece. If you can start to have a regular conversation with people rather than, you know, sound bites in a headline, that's when you can start to get that deeper understanding, I think, you know, both the understanding of the issues, but also the understanding of the value that nature and rivers and a restored environment can bring.
And that's exactly why I wanted to start this shit room session. So, Michelle, thank you so much for coming in. We've loved having you as a guest.
Thank you very much.
And come back again soon.
Definitely.
Thanks, guys.